busy week here in the House and in the Senate. The budget came out at noon. It's about a 1,200-page budget. It's got a 300 or 400-page summary, and it's got a 50-page summary of the summary. It was heard a few hours later in the Appropriations Committee. We had about a 5-hour hearing last night. The agenda is to have a vote on that in the committee on Wednesday, and then presumably it will come to the floor later this week or next week. In contrast to the Senate Republicans' experience with developing the Senate operating budget, pretty disappointed by how the House operating budget turned out. While Chair Ormsby, was certainly willing to hear suggestions by me and my members, at no point were any of us invited into the room to make decisions on really meaningful structural items or some of the biggest problems facing Washington State. And I think you see that difference play out in the budgets themselves. While neither budget, to their credit, raises taxes, the House budget spends about $1.1 billion more over the 4-year budget period. And that's going to lead to some pretty unsustainable budget results. The state's Democratic treasurer recommends that we maintain 10% reserves. The Senate budget does that. I think their reserves at the end of the 4-year period are 10.2%. The House budget does not. Our reserves are only 7.2% at the end of the 4-year period. So that's pretty unsustainable and unwise, according to our Democratic treasurer. Also, maybe not the best approach in a time of a lot of economic uncertainty like we're facing today. While there are certainly a lot of good things in the House Democrat budget, just like there are some good things in the Senate budget, I think the problem with the House budget is that it tries to do too much. By spending $1 billion more than the Senate budget, it sort of spreads state tax dollars around like peanut butter, so that every little group, every little project, every little program gets a small increase in funding, but that leaves not enough funding to go to the state's most pressing and urgent needs. K-12 education is the state's paramount duty. When I first got here, we saw education funding quickly climb to over 50% of the state budget, but now it is now we're going backwards in percentage terms. The House budget, I don't think, fully funds special education to the level it's needed. It does not spend as much in special education as the Senate budget does. It falls short in other areas like funding dual credit course costs for high school kids. It does practically nothing to ameliorate the severe learning loss that was experienced while schools were closed and conducted remotely. And then in other areas outside of K-12 education, we hear a lot about the need for healthcare access, but we're not paying healthcare providers adequate rates so that there are enough of them to provide access to the people who need care. But instead of increasing Medicaid rates across the board, Democrats made only very modest increase that's probably not going to meaningfully expand access. And lastly, circling back to a point J.T. Wilcox raised about the pursuit bill, Senator Braun mentioned that the Senate budget does a lot with regard to trying to improve recruitment and retention of law enforcement officers. The House budget does not do nearly enough in my mind. We're among many issues in that space. One is a recruitment and retention problem. And I don't think the House budget does what it's going to take to reverse that problem that local police departments are experiencing. So while I certainly appreciate the lack of new taxes, I think the severe, dramatic increase in spending, and despite all that increase, not actually funding the areas that need it the most, were somewhat disappointing. And I got to believe that had this been a more collaborative budget, we could have obtained a result that looks a lot more like the Senate, which I think would be better for the people of Washington.